So you're in San Francisco, huh?
San Francisco.
All your life?
Even sunny right now, a little bit after our very foggy morning.
Oh my gosh. Wow. A sunny day in San Francisco. That's kind of, what
Yeah,
is it Mark Twain said? Coldest winter you
coldest
ever
winter we
did,
ever spent, summer in
right?
San Francisco. In the last few weeks, I've been agreeing with him.
Is that right? Huh? You lived there for how
Ready,
long?
ready
How,
for September.
how long you lived there for, man?
Since 94, so what is that, 26 years? Long time.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And have you been a member of E2 for that long or
I have been a member. No, I mean, I don't. When did E2 start?
well, actually,
Not
too,
that long.
E2 started 20 years ago, I guess, right? Was
Yeah,
it?
I
Yeah.
joined about 15 years ago.
About 15 years ago.
First started.
Okay, so you were pretty much in the beginning, towards the
Early,
beginning there.
early.
Yeah, that was really great. Yeah, I wasn't until like 5 or 7 years ago till I found them. So, and it came about from some NRDC friends that I had. So it was kind of interesting for sure. Great. Well, you ready to go, sir?
I am ready and raring to go.
All right, excellent. Again, sorry for the all the technical difficulties. Did you press start recording on your end, by the way, if
I
you could?
did. I
Okay,
did.
that's perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about you, Bill, and where you come from and what you do. And I'll do the whole intro of that you sent me separately later. So,
Sure. I live in San Francisco. I spent my life in technology in terms of career. Got a couple of kids who are out of the house at the moment, sequestered, sheltering more or less at home with my wife. And actually, one of our girls is here right now, probably heading back to Boston for school in a little while, but we'll see how all that goes. About 15 years ago, got really concerned about climate change and made a big career shift and have been focused on climate and sustainability since then. Led sustainability and climate work at Google and then at Facebook. And about 2.5 years ago, left Facebook to really focus on climate. And in part because I believed I could actually drive more change and create more impact from outside companies at this point than I could from inside. Did a lot of wonderful, crazy, amazing stuff over the years at Google and Facebook. But now we're at a point where companies need to step up and they need a little extra encouragement.
yeah. So tell us about that. Tell folks about what is your whole new endeavor because it's really
Yeah.
amazing.
So in February of this year, we started a new initiative called Climate Voice, climatevoice.org. And the goal is to get to educate, engage, and empower the workforce, employees, students in their role as future employees, to push companies to really go all in on climate. So we've seen a lot of companies doing some amazing things on climate, and my former employers, Google and Facebook, I would say, fall into that category, doing lots of good stuff. But they kind of pick and choose. It's like, well, we can do this. This fits for us. We'll do this. We'll buy clean energy because we use a lot of energy. Google built Google Sunroof, which is this online service. You can go and it'll use AI and imagery to look at the roof of your house and tell you how much solar you might be able to put on there and give you referrals to, I think, solar installers and so on. So every company kind of picks what fits for them. The problem is when you add it all up, it's not getting us where we need to get on climate. I spent the last 15 years freaking out about climate, doing everything I could, and emissions are still rising. And that's not good because they need to be dropping rapidly. So our belief is that that companies can play a much bigger role in driving the system-wide, economy-wide progress we need, not just by focusing on their operations and their products and maybe their supply chain, but by really engaging on the kinds of public policies that will drive those solutions across the entire economy. So, it's great that Google, Facebook, Apple, Walmart, IKEA, hundreds of companies are buying clean energy and are getting to where they are. Some of them are at 100% clean energy, some are carbon neutral. That's great. We need everyone to be there. And there are lots of things standing in the way of that. It's not just a matter of, well, let's just get everyone to make that choice. we need to change the system so that it becomes easier, so it's the default. So in places where you have regulated utilities, that in fact those regulated utilities move to 100% clean energy quickly. And all of that takes public policy. Our goal is to get companies to weigh in on the policy, because companies have a lot of influence. And the fossil fuel companies and their allies who have a lot invested in the status quo and in not cutting emissions quickly because that'll hurt their business, they fight most climate policies. At the city level, the state level, the national level, internationally, they work to stop them, to delay them, to weaken them, and they have a lot of power. And when only a few companies, or in some cases none, actually step in to advocate in favor of the kinds of policies we need, then the dominant business voice is fossil fuel companies. And policymakers listen to their voters, their constituents, but also to business. And if the main business voice they hear is counseling caution and delay and modest measures, that's what we end up with. And that's kind of, in most places, that's what we have ended up with so far. California has been, I think, ahead of the game compared to, still isn't doing everything it needs to, but way ahead of most states and ahead of the US as a whole. New York has taken some big steps, really big steps the last couple of years. But most states in the US are nowhere near where they need to be in terms of being on a decarbonization pathway that will keep us safe.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible that even in the times of COVID, when everyone's been cutting back so much and not driving and all like that, still emissions are going up because it's cumulative, right? Even if we produce a third of what we did, if it's still a third more than nothing, I mean, if it's that much more than nothing,
right.
Then
well, emissions, I think during COVID dropped globally by, I don't know, 8 or 10%. Actually, I think what I've heard is that they think that for the year, emissions will be down 8 to 10%, which means in sort of the height of the lockdown, probably more than that. But, we're still in our houses, we're heating them, cooling them, lighting them, cooking, et cetera, right? Hot water. We may not be driving our personal cars as much. Freight is still moving, right? Food is moving, other goods, all the online shopping that a lot of people are doing, all that freight is moving around. Airlines are definitely, they're flying less, but still a fair amount. So there are a lot of things that, even with the economy locked down in a really incredible, horrific manner, emissions haven't dropped that much. So, I think we need to cut emissions. We need to cut them. The IPCC says we need to cut emissions in half in the next decade by 2030 and cut them to zero by 2050. And, for the next decade, that's like 8% a year, and 7, 8, 9% a year. And that is, really fast, faster than we've ever achieved. It's doable technically. It's doable, I think, actually at this point, given the cost of solar and wind and batteries and EVs and heat pumps and so on, it's doable in a way that economically makes good sense. But it takes more than just telling people you need to make better choices. It's about changing the system, and that's about changing the rules of the system.
So, Bill, I mean, there's no doubt that, I've been doing clean energy for a while, lots of projects, programs, and policy, and they're all interconnected. And, the thing that I always find with people that they have no clue about is that they can save money. And as a matter of fact, if they start integrating solar with the heating system, with electric heat, with heat pumps, with electric transportation for electric vehicles, they can save like 30% or more, So if we all did it, actually, there's a tremendous amount of way to save a lot of money while we're doing it. So I guess the question becomes, so I hear you. Basically, it's certain people have a vested interest, oil companies, et cetera, to continue doing the things that they've always done. What are some examples of both people who are doing it, who are joining in these businesses? You mentioned some of them, but what else can other businesses do? What can nonprofits do? And what can individuals do to help make this impact and help make it happen?
So you're right. Many things today, many of the choices you can make if you have the choice, and in some places people don't really have the choice, but if you have the choice, many of the choices you make, if you make the one that's better for climate, it actually might save you money. Okay, I think that, at this point, the cost of solar is such that if you can put solar on your house, you'll save money. New York has community solar regulations that allow, somebody to build a giant, megawatt, 5 megawatt solar farm in a field somewhere or on a big flat roof, and then sell the solar to individual homeowners and others. And they can save money in the process. So even if if you're a renter, not a homeowner, you don't have a roof you can put solar on, you can save money with solar through community solar, for example. EVs are close to where they are economically advantageous, but for many people, they're not yet. They cost more to buy. Tax credits help with that. They're a lot cheaper to run because the cost per mile of the fuel, the electricity, is way less than the cost of petroleum, even with gasoline being so cheap right now, relatively. The maintenance costs are way less because there are, many, many, many fewer moving parts. And there are no explosions happening inside it that, will create wear and tear, right? Which that's what an engine does.
No
right?
explosions, amazing.
Blowing shit up, right? So, so they're much cheaper to maintain. So if you drive a car a lot, a lot of miles a year, then total cost of ownership over a few years for an EV, even though it costs more to buy, it's going to be less. If you drive not that much, it might cost you more, and the upfront cost is higher, and that puts a lot of people off. And there aren't that many models available. There are a fair number, but not that many yet. So if everyone turned around tomorrow and said, I want to buy an EV, the market couldn't do that. So who is doing this? So, all the major tech companies are doing a lot, and they're sort of one-upping each other with bigger and bolder commitments, which is great, right? So Google's been carbon neutral since 2007 and hit 100% clean energy for all its operations, I think 2016 or 17. I mean, I left there in 2011, and we were well on the way to, sort of on that journey to 100% clean energy, but they got there 5 or 6 years after that. Facebook should hit 100% clean energy this year. Microsoft, I don't know if they're carbon neutral or they're close to it, but if they're not, they plan to be soon. They're getting close to 100% clean energy. Amazon has committed to 100% clean energy and committed to carbon neutrality. Microsoft actually just committed recently to be carbon negative for their all their operations, including going back to when they were founded in the 70s. So they're going to kind of offset all of that. All of that's great. Apple just made some big new announcements recently covering their entire supply chain. So they're going to be basically, clean energy and carbon neutral throughout their entire supply chain. That's great. But we need you and me and everyone here in San Francisco and everyone in Oklahoma and everyone in Bangladesh and everywhere around the world to do the same thing over the next couple of decades. And those, the EVs don't exist. Amazon has committed to buy, I think, 100,000 electric delivery vans.
Rivians, yep.
Right, incredible. And with that commitment, Rivian can tool up and build the factories and scale up and deliver them. But it's risky to, for a company to say, I think that people are going to buy 100,000 this year. Let me build the factory and hope they do. You can lose a lot of money that way. And lots of industries have had boom and bust cycles where people bet on where the market is going and then fail. So if you have a choice, you've got money to invest and you can put it in something that's safe, that's kind of, it's business as usual. We'll just keep doing what we've been doing and we're pretty confident the returns will be, whatever, 10% a year or something. Or we can bet that EVs are going to really take off this year, so we're going to put a lot of money into building the capacity to satisfy that demand. You could lose your shirt. And so people tend not to do that. And what reduces that risk, what mitigates that risk is public policy, right? So If you want people to invest a lot more in R&D, in innovation, in manufacturing capacity, take some of the risk away. And if we didn't have the deadline that the physics of the climate are imposing on us, right, I'd say, you know, I mean, I might say, you know what, I'd rather have the cleaner air, so let's push zero emissions vehicles and other things faster. But from a climate perspective, if we didn't have the catastrophe that is awaiting us, the market is going to figure this out. EVs are getting cheaper. They are going to win, no question. Wind and solar are winning, not fast enough, but they're winning because of where they've gotten to in the marketplace. But what will drive them faster is public policy, and that will help reduce the risk of innovation, reduce the risk of R&D, reduce the risk of scaling up capacity for manufacturing, and so on. And it'll create a lot of jobs in the process.
So to me, there's both the top down and the bottom up, right? So part of public policy, policy drives and creates programs, programs create incentives and opportunities for people to do projects, and along that line, basically you wind it up. On the other side, coming from kind of the bottom up, is consumer demand and building this, as you're doing, a business base, a business voice that comes out and says, yeah, this is what we want, so we want to make it happen. We're going to both buy and we're going to promote policies. Is that kind of your strategy? Is two-part?
Yep. Yeah, so one way to think about it, look, every business thinks about the financial bottom line for everything it does, right? I mean, you ask, what's it cost and what's it get me, right? What, you know, expenses, revenue, what's the difference? That's my gain or loss. And wherever you are in a business, you've got a budget of some sort, right? You've got headcount, you've got capital budget, you've got operational budget, and you kind of have to work within it. And you've got revenue goals if you're a revenue center. What businesses don't do is ask for everything they do, what's the climate bottom line? And they ask for a few things. And they ask about the things that somebody has paid attention to, and they realize, oh, that's a big deal. And if we don't pay attention to it, they might say, well, we should pay attention to it. In fact, when I joined Google, it was, they were looking for someone in 2005 to work on climate and clean energy, because Larry and Sergey, the founders, were passionate about it. So it wasn't that somebody from outside or inside was yelling at them saying, you need to do more on this. They just really, really, really cared. Most companies, I think, they care. But when they really start to act is when they start to get pressure from some avenue, inside or outside. And then they act on the things that the pressure is pointing at, but they don't act on all the things they're doing. I've been in the tech world, so the examples that quickly come to mind there and that I'm most familiar with are in the tech world. But Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, you may have seen over the last year and a half, all three of them were kind of called out in the press for having business units devoted to working with oil and gas companies. And in particular, for selling the oil and gas companies custom AI and cloud computing solutions to help them extract more oil and gas more cheaply, quickly, and reliably. And you could say, well, they've got AI technology, they've got cloud computing, they should sell it to whoever wants to use it. It's a tool. Someone wants to use it, they should use it. But if the company is committed to climate action and is committed to helping the world get on a path that is going to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which I think all those companies would say they are, and then they are marketing the hell out of the amazing things they're doing. And then the other half of their company, or another part of it, is over there selling services to oil and gas to help them get more oil out of the ground for us to burn more quickly. Then yeah, they're doing some good stuff. And on the other side of the company, they are helping us blow through our collective carbon budget much faster.
They got their foot on their accelerator, they got their foot on the brake at the same time. It's not a good situation. All they're going to do is burn us all up.
So if a company is going to really pay attention to the climate bottom line, it needs to pay attention to that, not just within its own operations in terms of its direct impact, but about everything it does. It needs to basically examine, its, at least its biggest customers, and ask, is what we're doing with these customers consistent with a safe climate future? And if it's not, then they've got to ask, well, what can we do about that? And Google, actually, to their credit, after a year of catching grief publicly and from a bunch of employees, they decided that they are not going to sign any more new contracts for these custom solutions for oil and gas, which is great. They haven't exited their existing ones. And, I'm sure that if they were to cancel them, there'd be penalties and whatever. I don't know how long those will last, but they have said, we're going to draw a line in the sand and say no more of this. That's huge. Amazon and Microsoft, they're doubling down, and I think that's a mistake. So any business should be asking, we're buying energy. What kind of energy is it? We are using energy. Are we using it efficiently? And that is, I would argue that is in some ways it is just an operational concern for the business. If you use energy more efficiently, then you're going to spend less, and that'll save you money. And if it's going to cost you any kind of premium to use clean energy, then if you can be really efficient, your premium will be much less. So, you need to look at what kind of energy you use. You need to look at how efficiently you use it. You then need to ask about your suppliers, right? So we buy stuff from people. It could be having our products manufactured, through some outsourced manufacturing company, and then we, receive them and sell them. Or it could be that just, we're buying desks and vehicles and other things. So how are those made? And what kind of energy is used to make them? And sort of back through your whole supply chain. How sustainable is it? What's the impact on the climate? And then the same question, as I said, ask about your customers. How are our products used? But then the other thing, that I think every companies tend to say, well, we use energy. We use a lot of electricity. So we're going to really focus on clean energy. But we don't have a big vehicle fleet. So we're not going to worry about vehicles. Or we'll buy EVs for our, security fleet, our 12 cars, but we're not going to get involved in EV policy or anything like that. And the problem is that when companies kind of stay in their lane, they say, well, we use a lot of energy, or we're an energy company, we're a solar company, so we're going to focus on electricity, solar policy. That means that the number of influential people and companies that are supporting any given climate-related policy is relatively small. And the collective influence you've got on the other side is pretty much the entire fossil fuel industry, whether it's about electricity or EVs or all electric buildings. I'm not sure what the policy situation is on building electrification in New York. In California, I think over 20 municipalities have put in place local ordinances requiring all new commercial and residential buildings to be all electric.
So that's one of the local policies that people can do anyway, right? So in New York, there's a $500 million worth of incentives to move to clean heating and cooling solutions, primarily because at least one county, Westchester County, which is just north of New York City, very affluent county, couldn't get any more natural gas supply because there wasn't enough pipeline capacity. And then there's a moratorium on natural gas fracking, which means that you can only import gas into the state as opposed to fracking it in the state. And you could discuss fracking for a long time, all the goods, the bads, the uglies, and the ups and downs, the boom and the bust. But the reality is, in New York, it's not happening. So now the question becomes, what do we do? And I think people are realizing, for instance, that in New York, one of the things we discovered is that you can build up to a 30-story building, and just under the footprint of that building, put in 500-foot deep wells. And those wells, the geothermal wells on a 500-foot on a 500-foot underneath, will carry a 30-story building, all the heating, all the air conditioning, all the hot water, and you can do it with third-party financing, so you can even reduce your capital costs. So that's waking some people up to, the opportunity to save money. But I think your point is very well taken, that, on the local level, what can people do? Because this show is really about what can people do. There's not just looking at the negatives and the downside are really horrible, but the real question is, okay, I want to do something. What can I do?
Well, I think one is get involved in your local politics, your city council, your county board of supervisors, whatever they're called, and at the state level, because it matters at all level of government, right? So and learn about what's happening with your local utility. Some places are relatively deregulated, and you can choose who to buy your energy from. Some places, it's like the old, was it the Model T? You can have it in any color you want as long as it's black. You can buy from anybody you want as long as it's a franchise monopoly, and it's going to be whatever color of electricity they give you, which is probably kind of brownish. So get involved in those often policy issues about. It could be about incentives. So I want to put a heat pump in my house. Are there incentives for that? Why not? Right now, in some places, heat pumps are more expensive. I think as the volume grows, those costs will come down. They've already come down a lot. Their quality has gone up a lot. They work well in a much wider range of climates than they used to. So, 5 or 10 years ago, people would say, oh, in really cold climates, upstate New York or Canada, you couldn't use a heat pump. I don't think that's true anymore.
It's not. You could go down to 15 degrees below zero in the Northeast easily. So in addition to the policy piece and working with local governments and state governments, et cetera, your piece on Climate Voice, I think, is one of the most interesting things, because basically what you're saying is if you have a business, your voice carries even more than an average person just coming up and protesting or making their piece. So tell us a little bit more about what's happening with your whole movement.
So policy is all about influence. Right. I mean, in the end, and I say influence not just in the, kind of the nasty way of, oh, somebody's slipping money under the table or whatever, and hopefully not much of that, but really about, in the end, political leaders, they lead, but they also follow, and they really pay attention to what their constituents care about. And I mean constituents broadly. So it's their the actual voters, those matter a lot. So if you're a voter and if you vote, reaching out to your elected representatives, city, county, state, federal level, matters. They want to hear from you, or they might not want to, but they care what you have to say. But in addition, businesses exercise a lot of influence in our political process because they have a lot at stake. The government regulates a lot of things, and any business that pays taxes cares about the tax code. The tech companies all care about privacy, and these days the big ones, antitrust and copyright and issues around dealing with children online, particularly children's privacy and bullying issues and so on. So there are lots of issues that are relevant to pick a sector. That sector, whether it's environmental issues or, privacy and other issues like that. And so big companies especially, have large public affairs teams that lobby government, that work to shape policy, that sometimes draft policy and hand it to policymakers and say, this is what we'd like to see. And it may change from there, but they work really hard to shape what that policy is if it affects them. So the fossil fuel companies lobby really hard and work to shape any policy that affects energy because it affects them. Most other companies that aren't energy companies don't get that involved, but they have a voice. And if they were to stand up and say to, the city council or state representative or somebody in Congress, this is an issue that's important to us. It's important to our employees. It's going to affect who we give campaign contributions to. It's going to affect who we invite to the groundbreaking or the ribbon cutting for our next big facility. So you want that photo op where you get credit for helping bring jobs to your district. We care about this. You need to remember that. It's going to affect, if it's a company that's growing and is actually building new facilities, it's going to affect where we put them. So, the tech companies, they are still probably the fastest growing sector in the country, if not the world. And even in this time of COVID, they are, I think mostly doing pretty well, unlike many, many other companies, sadly. They've been expanding for years, and they build new engineering centers, new sales offices. They build new data centers and or factories. And when they do, municipalities and states compete like hell to attract their business. They want that economic development, and they will offer tax breaks. They will offer infrastructure upgrades. You need you need a new gas pipeline. You need a new water, main. You need a new, an extension of the transmission grid to reach your facility. Maybe we'll help pay for that, because that'll bring the jobs and the construction and all of that economic activity to our state, to that district. So companies, negotiate really hard with states and municipalities to get benefits for themselves when they bring new development to a place. They don't negotiate for, we want you to be doing better on climate. So imagine, you probably remember when Amazon did this very high profile beauty contest for their, HQ2, the second headquarters.
Yep.
And ended up picking, I think it was it Brooklyn and Virginia. And then they bailed on Brooklyn because.
Yeah, it was Queens, but yep.
Yeah, Queens. Okay. There goes my
Close
geography.
enough, man. There you go. Yeah. San Francisco.
At least I didn't say it was Yonkers or something, right? So.
That would be in Westchester, but anyway, go ahead.
Exactly. They asked for a lot from, they kind of basically turned into a bidding war. What can you give us? Here are all the things we care about. What can you, and they said, they talked in their RFP about what they were doing on sustainability. They didn't say, we're going to favor places that are doing better on climate. Imagine if they had said, we are going to give significant preference to localities and states that have a climate action plan that is aligned with what the Paris Agreement and the IPCC say we need to do. I think that would have sent a real signal to that market, if you will, that's really important, and that cities and states need to step up. But companies aren't doing that yet.
So your mission and your piece behind Climate Voice is to get everybody, to get the big guys first, to go after the tech people, to start with where, anybody, anywhere? What's the kind of the plan?
We are focusing on big guys because they have the most influence. And so at the state and federal level, that's where we are really, we're a tiny little startup nonprofit, so we can't do everybody yet. So that's where we're starting to try to drive some real impact. As we grow, we will definitely expand, but we are interested in helping anybody figure out how they can drive change. So when you talk about, what people can do locally, one of the huge things is we need to accelerate building electrification dramatically, right? Getting fossil fuels out of buildings. And we need to start by basically we need to stop digging the hole deeper. Every new building we build that has fossil fuels plumbed into it makes the climate hole a little deeper, because that building's going to be there for 50 years, 100 years. All of the natural gas equipment and so on is going to last at least 20 or 30 years before it's going to be replaced. And so you now have this capital asset that if we want to stop burning those fossil fuels, is going to be wasted. It'll be a stranded asset. So you build that building and it's got fossil fuels, and suddenly, you've just locked in additional emissions for the next several decades. We need to stop doing that.
Stop digging our own grave, huh, Bill?
Right. Well, I think the grave's already at least partly dug, but we need to stop making it deeper. And then we need to start filling it in and get out of the hole. right? And that is a combination of people making choices because they can look and say, you know what, I can figure out how to finance this, do this with PACE financing or, performance contract or whatever, in a way that I actually save money or at least don't pay anything extra, and it saves me an upfront cost. So people can make those choices in some places. But it's not enough for me to make that choice and you to make that choice and some well-intentioned, good-hearted businesses to make that choice. We need everyone to make that choice quickly. And the market isn't going to do that on its own, not fast enough. So that takes public policy. And the fossil fuel companies are fighting it. I mean, out here in California, we've got the natural gas companies just gearing up like crazy to fight all of these local ordinances. There are states where they have put in, they've managed to actually get enacted state preemption bills that prevent municipalities from requiring new buildings to be all electric because they want to preserve their current business and their growth. And they're powerful.
So, a couple different things. It seems to me that one, policy is absolutely key, and you can go from the federal level down to the state level, down to the local level, and then there's from the bottom up again. So one of the things is people do have the ability in their local community to have ordinances about their local code about disallowing, and you're seeing some communities do that, right? I mean, have you seen?
There are about 30 around the country now on requiring all electric buildings, 30 or so municipalities.
There we go, and that's the way it starts, So right. I would say that it's both the bottom up, and each of us have to do it because everyone's got to do it, and definitely no doubt about it. When the policies are there, we'll all have to do it. But in the meantime, we can all start doing it ourselves, and we can all start with our local communities, helping them to
start with your own house, your own business. Do what you can, right. And take the time to figure out what are the policies that will help defray if there is, sort of additional cost or premium to it. Or how can I finance this, or have someone basically lease it or whatever, so that I don't have to pay the entire upfront cost. So yeah, there are things you can do yourself. There are things you can do in your local community, and you need to figure out who else you can work with to try to muster the kind of political will locally to get that to happen.
Fantastic. And Climate Voice is doing this all across the country with any type of business, right? I mean, you start with the big guys, but anybody can join in, right?
Start with the big guys, but it's about mobilizing the business voice and the way we're doing that is by educating and empowering, engaging the workforce to push businesses.
So basically taking it so that employees talk to their bosses and their companies about, hey, we really need to be doing that. And have you seen some success with that, I think?
We have. I mean, I think there are several companies. Salesforce out here is one where I think one of the reasons they have begun to step up more on climate policy is because employees have started to speak up about it. There are several other companies there was a bill in Virginia that mandates 100% clean energy on the grid and electric grid in Virginia by mid-century. It passed in March, was signed by the governor in April. All the clean energy companies supported it. No surprise there. There were 8 non-energy companies that publicly supported it. I think there were some that lobbied behind the scenes, weren't public about their support, but 8 non-energy companies publicly supported it. And one of the reasons is their employees were beginning to speak up and say, we need to take a stand on this stuff. And that's the first clean energy mandate of that scale in the South.
It's outstanding. So not only do we need to speak up for ourselves with our local communities, but if we speak up at work with our employers, that's a great way of having a lot further impact, that it just resonates out and just keeps going. I think it's brilliant, Bill. So I asked you for a quantum quote. So I don't know if you had one in mind, but some quote that comes in mind that you think that would really help people sort of reach that next level.
Yeah, so actually this is one, I started my career in computer science, and there was this amazingly creative, brilliant guy named Alan Kay, who was at Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, back in the 70s and 80s. He passed away a number of years ago, sadly, but he said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that has always resonated with me. And I think it's actually really important for where we are now. It's true with COVID, though that can be pretty demoralizing and depressing at times. It's true with climate. You look at a situation where we're not going in the right direction. We have a lot of the technologies, many of the technologies we need to solve it. There is still some innovation and invention required technologically, but I think where this is really relevant to something like climate is a lot of people look at where we are and then think about what could we do? What feels possible from here? And then we do that. And I think it's in this situation, what Alan Kay was really referring to was it's better to think about where do we want to be? Where do we need to be? You know, what does the science tell us would be safe versus potentially catastrophic? And then work backwards and try to figure out, okay, how do we get there? And what can I do to help accelerate that? What could I do with other people? And that requires creativity. It requires invention. It requires changing our, sort of collective will. And it may require real technological invention. But I think it's about a mindset of thinking about, where do we want to go? And then how do we get there? As opposed to we're here, where could I go from here? Which tends to lead to modest incremental steps.
Yeah, and the one thing about humanity, which is really amazing, is that when we are pressed to the wall, we find some incredible ways of innovating and getting ourselves out of unbelievable messes. So I think there's example after example. I have 6 minutes left with you, Bill, so I'm going to enter into the pulsar round really quickly for short, succinct, amazing, mind-blowing answers to these questions. What is the best advice you have ever received, sir?
Fear is normal. The right response is action, not paralysis.
Excellent. Outstanding. One personal habit that contributes to your success.
I tend to question, I don't know if it's everything, many things, assumptions, statements of fact, received wisdom, and doing this often leads to creative approaches, different solutions you just might not have thought of.
Outstanding. An internet resource.
Climate Nexus, I don't know if you know of it. They're a kind of news hub. Subscribe to their newsletter if you want to be up on what's going on, good and bad, in the climate clean energy world. They're great. Outstanding.
Any book that you'd recommend?
My focus these days is policy. I think lots of people I'm still very excited by lots of technological advances, but I think one of the best books on climate policy is called Designing Climate Solutions by Hal Harvey. A little bit wonky, but really, really worth reading if you want to understand what are the kinds of policies that can work in what kinds of situations.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. So
yeah.
All right, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing in the whole world, what would it be?
I would restore trust in expertise. I think that would solve a lot of our problems, so that people aren't. It's one thing to question assumptions and question facts, but it's another thing to say my facts are as good as yours when your facts are not facts. They're just random crap that someone has spewed out that you have taken and said you believe it because you like the person who said it, which I think too much how that happens today. We are all human, and the messenger matters, but I think that we could trust experts and expertise a lot more.
Yeah, one of the things that drives me crazy are these people that are like, anti-science, because it's all whatever. And I'm like, sure, no worries, get rid of your phone, get rid of your car, get rid of your house, get rid of anything that has to deal with engineering and science, because that's what all
civilization is based on. Get rid of almost all modern medicine.
Get rid of everything. And just go live in the woods and go pick your berries, because that's what you want. If you don't believe in science, that's where you're headed, man. Get rid of everything else because you don't believe in it, right? Yeah, it drives me nuts. Okay, we've got 4 minutes. Weather time fudge or weather time fun? An extreme weather event or something that sounds fun? Yeah, if you like this one. If not, you can pass on it if you want.
We were on vacation on the beach in North Carolina in 2004. It was a family reunion. There were like 25 people there. We weren't paying any attention to the news. We were having a good time. We're on the beach. It's warm. It's sunny. It started to rain pretty hard, which East Coast you expect sometimes in the summer. And then somebody came back from the grocery store and said she'd heard a person asking, someone else at the store if they were going to evacuate. I'm like, evacuate? What? Why? Well, it turns out Hurricane Charlie was barreling straight toward us. So we had to evacuate. We had to find a hotel in Wilmington, rearrange our flights out because the Wilmington airport was closed, blah, blah, blah. So we were lucky, right? We could have just been sitting there and not paying attention, and then would have been too late to evacuate. And we had the resources to cope. But it made me appreciate how vulnerable we all are and how hard it can be for some to cope. And I think really that was in 2004. That was kind of when I was just starting to really freak out about climate. And, looking back, and maybe that had some impact on how I was thinking about how important climate was, because those kinds of events were going to have gotten, bigger, stronger, or more numerous.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And actually, we're doing a weather time contest. And if you take a look at the website, you'll see my story. My daughter's in Wilmington, which is why I'm reminded of it, because she was in the midst of the whole thing. And if you take a look, you'll see my little story about that too. But anyway, thank you very much for sharing. All right, what's one thing you're energized about, sir?
This is a really complicated time. A lot of disruption. It seems like the world has turned upside down in several ways in the last 6-8 months. COVID, racial injustices, but the other side of that coin is the door seems to be opening for big change on many fronts: racial and economic justice, climate justice, civil rights. This amount of disruption, actually, a lot of stuff is being upended. I think that actually creates the opening for a lot of the kinds of change we need, and we need big changes. So that has me energized and hopeful.
In every crisis, there's an equal and opposite opportunity.
There
Great.
You go.
Outstanding. Parting advice, sir?
I think it gets back to that Adam Kay quote, which is, don't just think about where we are and what seems possible or doable. Think about where we need to go, where you want to go, and what it would take to get there, and then go do it.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.